Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Star Wars Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire for PC, Mac, and PlayStation. This is a rail shooter by LucasArts and the sequel to Star Wars Rebel Assault. It was released in 1995 and saw a better reception than its predecessor, partly because of the pretty high video quality for its time, as well as some improvements over the original game, but it still saw a pretty weak reception overall, which of course begs the question of whether or not they improved the massive glaring faults of the previous game, where it was pretty much unplayable, despite it having high marks as far as its presentation went, or whether this was simply a matter of looking better and sounding better than the original, but not playing any better. Let's delve right into it and find out. Well, as far as presentation goes, it's definitely a pretty decent step up over the original game, in no small part due to the fact that they use much higher quality FMV than they did in the original. And so you have a bunch of live actors playing the various parts of these characters, and yes, the acting is pretty cheesy at times.
Destroy the Alliance.
Repeat your message, Corellia.
We're Rebel Patrol. We haven't even time. They're boarding us.
Okay, kid. Stay sharp. Watch your scanners for Imperial vessels.
But in old games like this, that sort of cheese is actually something that adds to the charm rather than something that is a massive detriment. So it works out okay in the game's favor, and it does help that the actual visuals and frame rate have been improved considerably since Rebel Assault, so it both looks better and is smoother. That's not, of course, to say that it doesn't look extremely dated, because it does look extremely dated. I mean, the FMVs are pretty pixelated, and by today's standards, they look kind of awful. But for their time, they're actually some of the higher quality FMVs out there, and the non-FMV visuals are no slouch either. But then there's the sound design, which is just a straight-up improvement over the original game. I mean, sure, the acting is still incredibly cheesy, but the sound effects and the music are just higher quality than they were in the original Rebel Assault, so they sound considerably better than that, even though they do still have the issue of being early to mid-90s sound effects, subject to a lot of compression issues and such like that. So while they are definitely an improvement over the original Rebel Assault, they're still products of their time, and while they haven't aged as gracefully as other elements of this game have, they're still among the better aging end of the spectrum. And of course, it really does help that they do still use the John Williams score here, so it looks and sounds the part of Star Wars to a ludicrous degree. That all works very well in the game's favor. But improvements to the presentation can only go so far. What really matter here are the story and the gameplay, especially the gameplay considering how completely foobar the gameplay was in the original Rebel Assault. The story in this has you playing once again as Rookie 1, who is now an established male character, as opposed to in the original game where Rookie 1 was either a male or a female character, depending on your choice in the options menu. It didn't actually have any effect on the game or anything like that. It just made a difference with regards to their voice clips. But in this one, it is explicitly male, and he is on patrol around the planet of Dryton and receives a distress call from the Corellia star, which was being attacked by Imperials. And the story goes from there into the Empire having a new project that involves some sort of special fighter production. And I don't want to spoil too much of it for you, but suffice to say, this actually goes fairly far in trying to distance itself from what Rebel Assault did, in that this one is actually trying different things. It's not just sticking to the movie plots and trying to stick you in the movies themselves. Instead, it is another adventure, so to speak. You're playing as Rookie 1, going off and doing a separate side thing involving a secret Imperial project to create devastating new fighters. And while the story isn't particularly great, it's definitely a lot better than what we had in the previous game, where it was just trying and failing to stick Rookie 1 into the movies and trying to shoehorn crap in that just didn't work. At least this one tries to do something different and actually tries to add something to the Star Wars lore, even if the plot itself and the characters aren't particularly great. So there is that going for it, at least. And then when you get to the gameplay, you find that there are other improvements made to it as well, not just in the visuals department, but thankfully in the controls department. Unlike the original Rebel Assault, this game is very playable. at least when you're flying around and shooting things or going through the ground shooting segments. But when it comes to the actual controls, they feel much more responsive, much smoother, much more fluid than the original Rebel Assault. You actually feel like you have control over your starship or your character, as it were, unlike in the original, where you just went careening all over the place wherever the game wanted to throw you, particularly if you were trying to use the mouse, in which case it was completely impossible to play and you needed a joystick. This one, on the other hand, you can use either a mouse or a joystick and it will work just fine for the most part, although I tended to use the mouse because I found I performed better with it. But there is still a problem with the controls. They are a touch sensitive when it comes to the actual dodging various things when you're actually piloting your various starships. To give you an example, early on in the game they have you piloting a YT-1300 freighter, which is basically the Millennium Falcon's model. And you're having to maneuver the thing around various obstacles in the environment, much like you would in the original Rebel Assault. But thankfully, these moments where you're just having to purely dodge things are fairly few and far between, because they still suffer from the problem of your ship kind of careening all over the place whether you want it to or not, and really just having to make very minute adjustments to the ship's position in order to avoid hitting something. So it's still a nightmare during those segments, but luckily for the game, not only do the level skip codes work, but again, these segments where you're having to just purely dodge things are pretty few and far between. In fact, most of the game, you're just going to be blasting Imperial fighters, or you're going to be blasting space debris, or various things like that, and doing the sort of first-person piloting, dodging, and shooting thing that you had in the original Rebel Assault. But this one is more responsive. It's easier to figure out what you can dodge and what you can't really dodge, or what you don't need to dodge. And so it's definitely a lot more playable, but it still feels awkward, for lack of a better term. And those segments are among the weaker elements of the game. But then it goes through the just straight up on the ground shooting stuff bits where you're just playing as Rookie 1, running around on the ground, ducking in and out of cover, blasting stormtroopers. And those are interspersed at certain intervals to just kind of spice up the gameplay a bit to make it more than just flying around shooting stuff for the most part. And they're definitely welcome breaks from just doing that, but they're actually the easiest parts of the game, just because the controls are much simpler than what you're normally dealing with. All you have to do is use the right mouse button to duck in and out of cover, and use the left mouse button and aim the mouse to just shoot stormtroopers. And it's pretty straightforward and easy to do, so you don't really need to worry too much about anything. But that does highlight one really nasty problem this game has. At certain parts of it, it is ludicrously easy, and at other parts of it, it's just kind of smacking you in the face repeatedly. Particularly the dodging segments, where you're having to make these very minute adjustments to keep control of your ship. You're having a hard time dodging everything just because of the fact that it will send your ship careening all over the place at what you might think is only a very, very slight adjustment, but it turns out the game registers it as something rather big, and you just kind of go flying off, or you bounce off of a canyon wall or something like that, and that'll send you flying over to the other side of the canyon. It's kind of ridiculous. And even though it is nowhere near as bad as the original Rebel Assault, it is still pretty irritating, particularly when you get to the speeder bike level. To say the speeder bike bit is infuriating is an insult to infuriation. I distinctly remember getting past that level back in the day and feeling like I had just become the luckiest SOB on the planet, simply because it was that ridiculous trying to dodge trees and shoot Minox at the same time. That level is horrible, and compared to all of the other levels in the game, it just really stands out as that one element that they really kept from the original Rebel Assault. It's like that one level they threw in there just to drain your life pool down to only 1 or 2 lives for the remainder of the game. And that's enough to make you rage quit out of the game right there, if you hadn't already from the earlier segments where you're having to dodge all the sorts of things. Because, again, when you're flying around shooting stuff or you're on the ground shooting stuff, it's actually fairly straightforward and not really that difficult. When you get into the moments where you're having to just dodge stuff straight up, that's when the game really starts throwing you the middle finger. And it's just so wildly inconsistent that it is really hard to recommend, even though I do have quite a bit of nostalgia over this, and I did still manage to enjoy it a fair amount. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you don't like rail shooters, you'll get absolutely nothing out of this, but if you do like rail shooters, you could do worse than Rebel Assault 2, and if you want one that's Star Wars themed, I mean, this is better than the original Rebel Assault. So I can give a grudging recommendation with this one, but admittedly, most of that is from nostalgia more than anything else. It's not a particularly great game, but somehow, some way, it still manages to be fun in a sort of cheesy 90s FMV game sort of way. I will have a link in the video description box to where you can pick this up if you are interested. Thanks for watching.